D. James Kennedy Ministries presents Truths That Transform.
Hi, I'm Frank Wright, president of D. James Kennedy Ministries, and I have an urgent message to share with you. President Trump's nomination to fill the late Justice Scalia's seat on the U.S. Supreme Court is probably the most important political event of this year, and it may end up being the defining event of our generation. This nominee could help anchor the court for the next 30 years, and that is no small thing, considering how much power the Supreme Court wields over every facet of life right now. We need to make sure that the Senate confirms the nominee, and as soon as possible. We need to join together to make our voices heard loud and clear. So please go to our website, djkm.org, to sign the petition calling upon the Senate to confirm President Trump's nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court. Once again, please go to djkm.org to sign this urgent petition. President Trump has nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the United States Supreme Court. On today's program, you'll see how some current justices don't even believe the U.S. Constitution is all that worth defending. We'll tell you about how Judge Gorsuch can help put the Supreme Court back in its proper place. And we'll share an important resource with you that will give you the ammunition in the argument over the proper role of the court within our system of government. And as we begin, attorney Brad Dacus, who is president of the Pacific Justice Institute, has been in the arena fighting for religious liberty for decades. He joins us from Sacramento. Brad, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so here's the question. What is your opinion of Neil Gorsuch, President Trump's nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court?
He is really a dream come true. For those of us who respect the Constitution and the original intent of the language of the Constitution, we're very pleased with regards to his selection. In fact, he is frankly my number one choice for selection to be sitting on the Supreme Court for multiple reasons.
Brad, tell us a little bit about Judge Gorsuch's judicial philosophy. What do you think separates him from some of the other justices on the court, for example, from Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Justice Breyer?
Right. Well, first off, he's not a judicial activist. He's made it very clear in his writings, his opinions, that it is not the job of judges to use the law and bend the law to get the outcome that they want. It's their job to be neutral and to apply the law as it is written, as it was intended, even if they don't like the outcome. That's the classic kind of justice that we want to be sitting not only on the Supreme Court, but on all our judicial spots, both federal and state level.
Brad, you've been fighting this battle for a long time, and I know you have cases that are immediately before you, but you also look at sort of the broad sweep of what's happening in the judiciary. It seems to us that we're standing on the precipice of either judicial tyranny or a return to a constitutional foundation for law. What is your view about how important it is to get Judge Gorsuch confirmed for the Supreme Court vacancy?
Yeah, well, first, this judge is the best judge, in my opinion, out there to be sitting on the Supreme Court if you want someone who's going to protect the Constitution by proper interpretation of the Constitution and not just treating it as a living and breathing document that they can change at will. And if we don't have trust in the Constitution, if we don't know that the Constitution is going to be respected, then the Supreme Court becomes a political volleyball game. It just simply is who has the majority to, what interest group has the majority to push and thrust upon everyone else their agenda. And then we have, that amounts to tyranny, and with that kind of tyranny, we have a complete crumbling of our system of government and respect for our government, because we do not have a foundation that is reliable, that can be trusted.
Brad, thanks so much for joining us. We always appreciate your insights.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
The courts have played a major part in the diminution of Christian freedom. A little later, you'll see how some Supreme Court justices don't even particularly value our Constitution. Ultimately, the issue comes down to one of worldviews. One worldview, rooted in God, leads to freedom for all. The other worldview, rooted in the sovereignty of man, always leads to tyranny. Dr. D. James Kennedy explains this in this portion of his message, The Rise of Tyranny.
Today, I would like to focus on one issue, and that is the issue of freedom. Freedom in general for all of our citizens, and Christian freedom in particular, which is, I believe, today under serious attack. In fact, under more serious attack by far than ever has been experienced before in the history of this nation. I think we should also remember that never before in history do we have any example of a nation losing its religious liberty without shortly thereafter losing all of its other liberties as well. You know, freedom is a very central theme to the Bible. In fact, it has been said that freedom is the central theme of the Bible. People can hardly imagine liberty being lost in America. But may I tell you what Franklin said again on this subject? He said, after having given to us that Declaration, and after the Founding Fathers gave us the Constitution, one of the primary purposes of which was to secure the blessings of liberty. He said that we had been given a constitutional republic, and that it will no doubt be administered well for a while, but the time will come, he said, when it will no longer be administered well, and tyranny will prevail. In America, said Benjamin Franklin. My friends, the time is coming when Christians are going to have to stand up and stand together. Well, how can such things as this happen? Why? Why can we be faced with such a possible loss of freedom in this land of freedom? What has happened to the guarantee of liberty? Well, Francis Schaeffer, in his excellent book, which you all ought to read, entitled Christian Manifesto, points out very clearly that what we are faced with in our nation today is two totally opposing world and life views. We have the historic, traditional, Christian, theistic world and life view. On the other hand, we have the materialistic, atheistic world and life view of humanism. And these are totally antithetical at every point. And these two views are struggling for the soul of America. Well, why is it that we are losing so badly? For two reasons. One, humanism is absolutely an aggressive and totalitarian concept. It will brook no rivals in the public sphere, and it is determined to remove every vestige of Christianity from the public life of this nation. And any Christian that sticks his head up where it can be seen outside of the church is going to get it cut off if they have anything to do with it. On the other hand, Christianity is a total world and life view. That the truth that makes us free is a truth that deals with every sphere of life. The founding fathers of this country knew that the Word of God had something to say about every phase of life. It was a Christian doctrine of man that separated the powers of government. And all of those checks and balances which are now being destroyed were based upon Christian concepts. Yes, it will be administered well for a while, and then there will come tyranny. And may I say again, never in history has religious freedom been lost, but that all other freedoms were lost shortly thereafter. It begins, of course, in the individual heart. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. We need to spread the Word of God, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the truth that makes people free. We need to spread the Word concerning the relationship of every phase of life to the gospel of Christ and to His Word. My friends, we're now going to find that because we fail to share the gospel with others, that their hearts are committed to an atheistic view which is becoming increasingly militant and hostile to everything that we as Christians believe in and hold dear. And because we have allowed by default this army of people to grow, we are going to begin to feel the increasing oppression that they are bringing to bear. May God grant that by His Spirit we may begin to reverse this trend, because it's only where the Spirit of the Lord is that there is liberty.
Dr. Kennedy was almost prophetic in his predictions that the future of religious liberty in America was in great jeopardy. Since he spoke those words, we've seen people lose their livelihoods and even be prosecuted for standing on their Christian convictions regarding the institution of marriage. Our legal system, led by the Supreme Court, has aided and abetted a kind of judicial larceny, stealing our most basic liberties. They have turned aside from the Constitution to implement fashionable, progressive policies. As you're about to see, some of the justices don't even believe America's Constitution is all that worth defending. This is why filling the Supreme Court vacancy with a true defender of the Constitution is so essential. Here's our own John Rabe with more.
One of the most egregious modern trends in jurisprudence has been the rise of citing foreign courts and foreign opinions in rulings when developing opinions on American domestic law.
These judges, these justices on the Supreme Court are proudly saying that they, in many cases, are resorting to international tradition, foreign tradition, when there is utterly no authority for them to do that under the Constitution.
This is a curious development, considering that the justices of the Supreme Court, like our elected officials, take an oath to uphold and defend the United States Constitution. The late Phyllis Schlafly, an attorney and the author of The Supremacists, The Tyranny of Judges and How to Stop It, was piqued by such examples.
This was particularly evident in the case of Lawrence v. Texas, which was the Texas sodomy case, where the court created this new right of sodomy that nobody else had ever seen in the Constitution. So they couldn't find anything in our U.S. Constitution to uphold this decision. So the court relied on the British Parliament, a European Court of Human Rights, and some brief that was filed by a UN High Commissioner. Now, the idea that these items should decide what U.S. law is just an outrage.
David Limbaugh is an attorney and the author of Persecution: How Liberals Are Waging War on Christianity.
You undermine the Constitution when you resort to foreign law whimsically like that, but it's also, in substance, a dangerous thing, because the European left is way out on an extreme limb. European courts or Canadian courts or legislatures pass these kind of laws and render the kind of decisions that are suppressing religious liberties. We see in Canada that the Bible, certain portions of the Bible have been declared hate speech. The same thing has happened in certain European countries. And for our judges to arbitrarily adopt these types of rulings constitutes a grave danger to religious liberty in this country.
And the justices are not only borrowing from European courts. In one Supreme Court death penalty case, Justice Stephen Breyer wrote a dissent citing court rulings from India, Jamaica, and even Zimbabwe.
Now, Zimbabwe, of course, is a bloody dictatorship by Robert Mugabe. You might as well look to the Supreme Court of Cuba, which is not as bad as Zimbabwe.
The late Judge Robert Bork was a legal scholar who was nominated for the Supreme Court by President Ronald Reagan in 1987. His nomination was defeated in the Senate after a contentious partisan battle.
Why anything that Zimbabwe or England or France or anybody is doing today has relevance to what the people in Philadelphia and the ratifiers back when the Constitution was adopted understood themselves to be doing back then is a mystery. It doesn't have anything to do with it.
There are some appropriate ways for foreign law to be considered in an American court. For example, if we have a treaty obligation with another country, it makes perfect sense to interpret that according to this international law of how treaties are to be interpreted.
Carrie Severino is Chief Counsel and Policy Director for the Judicial Crisis Network.
There are, however, a lot of illegitimate ways that international and foreign law is used in courts as well, and that is when we're using it to tell us what our own Constitution means. In fact, our Constitution is an American document, and our laws are passed by a democratically elected Congress. We shouldn't be importing laws from other countries. It becomes really just a fig leaf for the justices to find the result that they want and then find some country. There's got to be, there's hundreds of them, there's got to be a country somewhere that has a law, and we can say, well, look, we're following the law of Zimbabwe and Italy and China. They all have the same law. This is a international consensus. That's not how it works.
Some legal experts have noted that the reliance on foreign law is accompanied by a dim view of the American Constitution.
Many justices on the Supreme Court, as well as many law professors in the United States, think the United States Constitution is outmoded. After all, it was written in the 18th century, and we've evolved 2 centuries beyond that, and the Constitution really needs to be changed.
In early 2012, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked on Egyptian television how she would advise Egypt in writing a new constitution.
I would not look to the U.S. Constitution if I were drafting a constitution in the year 2012. I might look at the Constitution of South Africa. That was a deliberate attempt to have a fundamental instrument of government that embraced basic human rights, had an independent judiciary. It really is, I think, a great piece of work that was done. You would almost certainly look at the European Convention on Human Rights.
It is disheartening, to say the least, to see that one of our Supreme Court justices doesn't seem to think the Constitution was built on principles that other nations should emulate. The most disturbing thing about her comments to me, however, was that the way that these modern constitutions that she pointed to are organized is very different understanding of the way constitutions work. We have a system that creates a government of limited powers. On the other hand, something like the Constitution of South Africa starts with rights like the right to housing, the right to health care, not negative rights where you can't interfere with my freedom of religion or speech or things like that. No, these are rights where the government has to actually provide these things for you. And that's a very different understanding of how the government works.
For 2 centuries, Americans thought of themselves as exceptional, that they were not like the people of Europe. And indeed, they weren't. The American people recognized a principle that did not prevail in these other countries, and that principle was that the civil government does not have jurisdiction over much of our lives. Justice Ginsburg does not believe in a constitution that defines liberty as freedom from the civil government imposing its standards upon every area of your life. And many judges are ignorant instruments of a movement that would place all of the American people into bondage rather than enjoying the liberty that our founders fought for and risked their lives, their fortunes, and their honor.
My friends, it is absolutely amazing to hear a United States Supreme Court Justice say that she would recommend the Constitution of South Africa over America's if someone were forming a new country. Our Constitution is a document based on inalienable rights given to us by God, which was the basis for a new birth of freedom, prosperity, and human flourishing unseen in modern history. And yet the understanding of this connection between our Constitution and our most precious freedoms has been all but lost in our day. Yet our hope of freedom in the future may well depend upon our ability to recapture and articulate this important truth. Well, we have a great resource available to equip you to better understand the genius of the design of our founders. This is a resource you must have for yourself and to share with others. With the debate over the next justice of the Supreme Court immediately before us, this resource could not be more timely or important. And here's my very dear friend, Jennifer Kennedy Cassidy, to tell us more about it. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you, Frank. The important book Frank is describing is called In the Footsteps of Giants, Solutions from the Founders for a Nation Gone Astray by Dr. Jerry Newcomb. Our nation can't survive unless we change the course we've been headed down for several decades. That's why it's so important that we turn back. Hopefully that turn is already beginning. And it's vitally important that you know the truth about the Christian foundations of America so that you can help this nation get back to where it needs to be. In the Footsteps of Giants, Solutions from the Founders for a Nation Gone Astray takes you on a guided tour of what the founders said about crucial issues facing us today. And we'll send it to you as our thanks for your generous donation of any amount to the ongoing work of this ministry. Simply write to us at D. James Kennedy Ministries, Box 11154, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33339. Or call toll-free 877-962-7677. Or go online to djkm.org. Though many judges and powerful organizations have twisted the First Amendment to exclude the proclamation of God in the public life of our nation, America's founders intended exactly the opposite. They knew that, as George Washington said, religion and morality were indispensable supports of our political prosperity. In fact, Washington said, "In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness." Yet that's exactly what's happening today in our courts, institutions, and education system. As we've forgotten our Christian roots, we see our freedom and prosperity slipping away. That's why it's so important that you know the truth about the Christian foundations of America and be able to share that truth with others. In the Footsteps of Giants, Solutions from the Founders for a Nation Gone Astray by Dr. Jerry Newcomb will help you to do just that. We'll send it to you right away as our thanks for your generous donation. Simply write to us at D. James Kennedy Ministries, Box 11154, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33339. Or call toll-free 877-962-7677. Or go online to djkm.org.
President Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch, is one of the most qualified nominees ever put forward. He has a law degree from Harvard, a PhD in legal philosophy from Oxford University, and has served honorably on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals for a decade. He was confirmed for that post unanimously by the Senate in 2006, receiving votes from, among others, Chuck Schumer, Dianne Feinstein, Patrick Leahy, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton. Now, some would have you believe that Judge Gorsuch is the most frightening, unqualified candidate ever nominated. Nancy Pelosi characterized the Gorsuch nomination just seconds after it was announced as a very hostile appointment. Protesters held up pre-printed signs with a blank space to write in the nominee's name, something one wit called the Mad Lib protest. Of course, none of this has anything to do with Neil Gorsuch or with the facts. Rather, it has to do with a long-term strategy by the left of implementing their policy preferences through activist judges on the federal courts. The Supreme Court, therefore, represents the ultimate battleground for them because it is the key to advancing their liberal socialist agenda. Ever since President Ronald Reagan nominated Robert Bork in 1987, we've seen a rebirth of the politics of personal destruction. You will hear calls for civility in the Senate, but that kind of civility seems to be an entitlement of liberal nominations only. For example, the extremely liberal Ruth Bader Ginsburg was confirmed 96-3. Another denizen of leftist judicial philosophy, Stephen Breyer, was confirmed 87-9. Meanwhile, constitutional conservative Robert Bork was voted down. Clarence Thomas was narrowly confirmed 52-48, and Samuel Alito couldn't even get 60 Senate votes. So remember, as you watch this process unfold, the manufactured outrage you are hearing is just that. It's a fabricated indignation designed to maintain the power and judicial activism of liberal socialists. And when you hear calls for conservatives to compromise, you are hearing a call that liberal socialists have manifestly never answered themselves. This is a crucial nomination, and the future of true freedom literally hangs in the balance. This is a time for constitutional conservatives to stand and fight for the Supreme Court as tenaciously as liberal progressives have done for decades. One way you can help us do that is by immediately signing our petition to the Senate to confirm Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. It's available on our website right now at djkm.org. I'm Frank Wright. Thanks for joining us for Truths That Transform. We'll see you next time.
Next week on Truths That Transform.
Do we see Christ as formidable? Or is he merely gentle Jesus?
There's no greater duty on the Senate than to confirm good judges so that we have people who believe in the Constitution and who understand their role as judges.
That's next week. Today's program is available on DVD for your gift to this ministry of any amount. Please call, write, or log on to our website today. This has been a production of D. James Kennedy Ministries.